my screen and hand over to you, Neil.
Right, okay. Well, good morning, everybody. I think we have about sort of 22, 25 people here today to talk about sheep worrying, and the actual survey that the National Sheep Association you've done was closed on the 19th of April. So the results are going to be presented on Wednesday, the 5th of May. So that is good. Can I first of all say it's a pleasure to chair this. Most of you probably know who I am. I'm Neil Parish MP, and I chair the Environment, Food, Rural Affairs Select Committee, deal with a lot of agriculture and environment. And it's always a pleasure to deal with the National Sheep Association. And I'm not saying that just because I'm chairing this morning, and Phil Stocker comes very often and gives very good and clear evidence. So because when you're chairing a select committee, you need to have the right evidence and be very clear about it. So it's a pleasure to chair this morning. I had sheep between about 1980 and about 1992. We did have some sheep worrying. We went out, my father was alive in those days, we went out in the middle of the night to try and find what was going on. A lot of stray dogs about in those days, amazing, through the village. Turned out to be a neighbour's dog in the end. We lost several ewes, drowned in the ditches. There's a lot of ditches because they humped them in there, and of course the dog did, and of course bit them as well. So I don't think people realise sometimes how much of a problem they are, especially if they're inland ewes, especially got lambs with them. And I think some people just don't understand, do they? And some people just don't care. And I think today we got some really good speakers to really try and sort of hammer out, is it new legislation we need? Is the legislation we've got being actually enacted on? Can we tweak it? And we have, like I said, Marissa Heath will be on later, from APGOR, the All-Party Animal Welfare Group, that did a very good report on sheep worrying, I think probably a couple of years ago now, so time moves on. I would like to have a session on sheep worrying with the Select Committee. It's just getting round to it, because there is so much going on at the moment with exporting or not exporting, and all the things with the new EU regulations, let alone the new ELMs and everything else. But anyway, welcome everybody. It's enough from me, because you're not coming to listen to me, you're coming to listen to the first speaker, who I don't think probably needs any introduction to you all. So it's Phil Stocker, NCA Chief Executive. So over to you, Phil.
Thank you very much, Neil. And can I just say thank you to you as well for coming and chairing this webinar, this breakfast webinar this morning. Really appreciate it, and we really appreciate all the work that you do for agriculture and the sheep industry more widely as well, so thank you. So yeah, I've got a little bit of time just to run through some of the survey results from the survey that we've been running over the last couple of months. We've been working on this issue for well over 8 years now, and sadly I'd have to say that the problem seems to almost get exponentially worse, almost year on year. And for some time we've felt that that's been a result of more profile, and the fact that more people are reporting, or taking the trouble to report cases of sheep worrying by dogs. But actually this year, I think, during lockdown, COVID lockdown, I don't think there's any doubt that we've seen numbers of cases reported go up, and the numbers of incidents go up again. And we've got some very interesting results from this survey that I'll run through now. And I hope, going back to what Neil, you said about, we need to put more effort into, or we need to do a lot more work in relation to sorting out what we do to try to overcome this problem. Again, we've been working on both education and trying to make a case for strengthening up the legislation for some time now. But I think that the results of this survey give us a good indication of the sorts of things that farmers that have suffered these attacks, where they feel we should be going to resolve some of the issues. So to begin with, we had 616 people contribute to the survey this time. That's significantly more than we've had previously. It's a 20% increase on the highest ever previous response, and I think that was way back in 2013, and some work that we did in partnership with Farmers Guardian at the time. And if you compare this year, and bear in mind that to complete the response, you needed to have had a case of sheep worrying by dogs. So this is quite indicative of the number of people that have suffered with this issue. So compared to 2020, the previous year, there was a 460% increase in terms of respondents. And again, you know, that could have been, some of it would be the number of people that bothered to respond to the survey, but I don't think there's any doubt that a lot of it is because there's been an increase in incidents as well over the year. So regionally, the north of England had the highest number of survey responses. You know, that's interesting in itself. It's an area where there's a lot of sheep, obviously. It's an area where there's a lot of common ground and national parks. It's an area that attracts a lot of tourists, but it's also an area which is in some parts highly urbanized. And that takes us on to the second region, really, which is the southeast region, which is a very highly urbanized part of the country. Again, lower numbers of sheep, but the higher density of people, I guess, and the way that people use the countryside there is probably an indication of why the southeast region is badly affected. And Scotland as well is the third in all of our regions. We think there that there's an issue of Scotland, farmers in Scotland responding proactively and well to the survey, possibly due to increases in publicity around legislative changes. So it's very high on people's minds at the moment, and I would have thought that a lot of people have got it right at the top of their agendas and probably responded to the survey. But then you move around the southwest and Wales. We know that we've got a very, very proactive and effective police response in Wales as well, interestingly. And then the marches, the central region and the eastern region, of course, and Northern Ireland as well, sorry, and there you get into the areas where there are fewer sheep numbers when you get over into the eastern region as well. So in terms of the incidence and severity, over the last 12 months, the average number of incidents experienced per farmer was 7. So in a 12-month period, you know, the average farmer that is getting this problem is experiencing it 7 times during the year, which is quite staggering in itself. We did have a couple of respondents that were over the 100 mark, and quite well, whether that's a reporting issue, whether they're counting sheep that are being affected, individual sheep or not, I'm not sure really. But you know, the important figure there is it's 7. That's not far off of 1 every 2 months, you know, just over 1 every 2 months. You know, it's really quite serious. How many sheep are injured per incident? Again, the average figures are the most important, and an average number is 5 that are being injured, and an average number of sheep being killed are 2. So, you know, again, I don't think any of us would be surprised about that. You see so many pictures of a couple of dead sheep and a larger number of injured sheep that are torn or got their ears torn off or whatever it might be. There's plenty of other areas of work going on in this subject, and figures from other sources also show an increase in cases. Farmers Guardian have been very active in this work recently, and the work they've done has shown an increase. And the insurance claims from NFU Mutual estimate a 50% rise in claims in Q1 of 2021 as well. And I'm sure that that's a statistic that will continue for the rest of the year. One of the questions was very much around the personal impact on farmers, and yeah, anger. Okay, these are wonderful, these word clouds, aren't they? Really, but they're quite nice to look at. And the one that comes out strongest and most boldly there is anger. And I think anger probably encapsulates a few of the other emotions listed there as well. Anger was the most common emotion that people reported, and anger is linked to stress and anxiety and frustration that people can't do anything to resolve the problem, and that general feeling of helplessness as well. And interestingly, much smaller down in the bottom centre there, loss of income and animal welfare were of equal concern. So on many occasions, you get responses from dog owners suggesting that you know, why would a farmer worry? The sheep are only going to be killed anyway. and all you're worried about is a loss of income. But actually, we know that that's not true. And from all of the survey work we've done for years now, we know that animal welfare concerns, and again, that the distress and anxiety that's caused is probably even more important than a loss of income. The impact on farmers' mental health, again, interesting if you look at that top bar, that those who said that there were no impact, up around about 95 or 96 people said there was no impact at all. But then if you cluster those that responded to 5 and above, with 10 being the most severely affected, I think there's 56% of total respondents reported a moderate to severe impact on their mental health due to sheep worrying incidents. And we know that for a long time now, mental health has been very much in the news. And we know that during lockdown, there's been a lot talked about access to the countryside, helping people through lockdown and helping them with their anxiety and mental health. But farmers suffer from mental health too. And we've seen that these cases add a huge amount of worry, anxiety, and fear. And at one extreme end of the spectrum here, I know of one farming family down on the south coast who will say that they've lost their social life because they can't leave their farms at weekends and bank holidays when they know that the area is going to be busy, because they know that there's going to be attack every day. They've got children at university and they just can't go and see them. They can't go anywhere. I'm talking about outside of lockdown now. But when these cases are severe, then the impact on people's mental health and their social lives is extreme. The impact of COVID, of course, we've just had over 12 months of COVID and lockdowns. And one of the questions was, did you see an increase in sheep worrying as a result of the national lockdown? 67% of respondents said yes, they're sure that there's been a direct response to the lockdown. And when people were asked about more detail around that, again, there's no great surprises here, I don't think, but the more dog owners being at home with more time to exercise, and a lot of the places where dog owners would normally take their dogs to more organised venues and country parks and the like being closed. So people have been forced out into the open countryside where they encounter things that they're maybe not used to, really. So yeah, more dog owners at home with more time to exercise, and then the increased ownership of dogs as pets as well. And we've found from the Pet Food Manufacturers Association estimates that there are now 12 million dogs in the UK, and over the last 12 months we've seen an 11% increase in pet ownership. Now, it's not all dogs, but I think we all know that the numbers of dogs bred and purchased over this last 12 months has gone up. And I think we also all fear as well that a lot of those dogs are going to be still at a stage of puppyhood, and possibly a stage when there's still a big novelty factor around them and they're being looked after, and maybe they're not at an age that they can cause much damage. But I think we're going to have to watch this very, very carefully as we go through into the summer as well. Linked to all of that, there's been a reduction in access to dog training due to lockdown. So a lot of those dogs, certainly the ones that would have gone to the vets and taken veterinary advice, they would be encouraged to go to puppy training classes and to get used to other dogs and get used to people and just start that training process, I guess. But, there's been very few of those training classes take place during lockdown. We asked questions about the communication between the farmer or the shepherd and the dog owner. And one of those questions, if you approach a dog owner or walker to put their dog on a lead, are you met with a positive or negative response? So remember, this is about someone approaching someone out with a dog off a lead and just asking them if they'll put the dog on the lead. Just 9% said that they were met with a positive response. 30% said it was neutral, but more disturbingly, 61% said that they were met with a negative response. And again, digging a little bit deeper into that subject, what was the outcome of approaching a dog owner to put them on a lead? 51% said that they had some verbal abuse. 48% said they were ignored by the dog owner. 21% said they were intimidated by the dog owner. Yeah, farmers on more occasions than not. So over 50% have experienced verbal abuse when asking their dog owner to put the dog on a lead. Dog owners' reactions may well be down to a lack of understanding, as well as a lack of care or concern. and often maybe a natural pushback at being bossed around, being told what to do with their pet, with their dog. And from that, we draw a conclusion that education and trying to build respect and relationships between farmers and dog owners is a key element in changing attitudes and behaviours. And it's probably also right to accept that maybe there's a bit more work we need to do within the farming community about the way that farmers do approach people and ask them to put their dogs on leads as well. So there's a lot more that can be done in that area, I think. The numbers of dogs involved, in most cases, it seems to be 1 or 2. That's probably indicative that a large number of these cases happen when someone is out with their dog. You know, and we do hear cases of packs of dogs roaming around, but in the main, it's 1 or 2 dogs. And the assumptions of typical assumptions of dog owners in terms of why these attacks are taking places. 70% say that it's because dogs aren't being put on a lead when they're near livestock. 66% say that owners feel that dogs won't attack livestock or won't do any damage if they do. And we hear of many, many occasions when dog owners will say, will ask what the problem is. My dog's just having fun. It's not caught a sheep. It's just chasing them around. It's just having fun. What's the problem with that? Well, we all know there's a really serious problem with that in terms of killing lambs inside and aborted lambs. 49% report a complete lack of regard or concern around the issue. 47% said that there is an issue of dogs being just roaming from local villages or towns and escape from gardens and kennels. 39% assume that their dogs are well trained and will respond to commands, but once that instinct kicks in and the dog chases, it's very unusual that is the case. And there's still a small number of people that are involved in this issue of poaching or illegal sport, hare coursing and the like. And you know, all of that, I guess, gives evidence for the need for more measures to drive more responsible dog ownership. As far as the finances are concerned, then the financial cost, some people estimated a cost of up to £50,000, but on average across all respondents, the costs were £1,570. Only a small proportion, 10% of respondents, felt that the compensation covered their financial loss. And some of the comments that we picked up are there in front of you. I cannot really put a price on the time I spent trying to educate dog owners, and also the stress and anger I feel. How do you put a cost on that? Abortion storms, you know, from dogs just chasing sheep around. It could be some weeks before you see the evidence of that. So calculating that total loss is really, really difficult. And a comment there, because of worrying claims in the past, I've become uninsurable. So again, it leaves people in a very vulnerable position. So 60% of farmers said that 60% of incidents resulted in death of sheep, 72% resulted in injury, and 67% of incidents resulted in a loss of production. So very high levels of across all of those factors. A final, I think, just a commentary on some of the police responses. And I feel a bit uncomfortable actually doing this, because I know that the police have, there's been a lot of work that's been done to increase awareness amongst police forces. There's a lot of work going on within police forces to try to achieve greater levels of consistency, but it's probably also right that we shine a bit of a light on what people are seeing at the moment out there. The number of cases where a crime reference number or a crime incident number has been issued, so that is following a report to the police, has increased significantly. 70% for a reference number and 30% for a crime incident number. So that's increased significantly, which is a good thing. It means that more people are reporting to the police. And when cases are reported, a crime reference number or an incident number is being given. So that's a very positive statistic. 33% said that a rural crime team or an officer had now been appointed in their region. And that's more than double those reporting similar in 2017. So the development of those rural crime teams and people that are responsible for these issues is on the up, which again is very good outcome. However, a majority of respondents, 56%, felt that there was no positive activity and there was a lack of visibility of police action in their area. And in 2020, the average police rating was 3 out of 10. So that was 2020 compared to 2021 this year being 3.85. So there's been a slight improvement, I guess, in people's views about how the police have responded to these cases. And I wouldn't want to draw too much attention to the table on the right hand side there, really, but again, it's maybe interesting to point out that Southwest had probably the most positive view of how people how police reacted to these cases, and Wales, and again we know Wales has been very active in this, is up there as well. And I think that's probably I think this is probably the last one, which really takes us on. We talked a lot, I guess, about the need to continue to work on awareness and education, and a greater level of responsibility, but legislation is also a big part of this. And most people will be aware that the law recently changed in Scotland. It increased the powers of the police to be able to seize dogs. And it also increased the maximum level of fines to £40,000 as well. And there was a basic question there about whether people did agree with the approach that Scottish legislation has taken. And it's probably no surprise, really, that 82% felt that was absolutely right. And while we talk about a maximum fine, that doesn't mean it is an automatic fine of £40,000, but big fines like that do act as a deterrent. And I think that's really, really important. And I think I'll leave it there. Thank you, Neil.
Okay, Phil, thank you very much. I think that's a really good, sets the scene very nicely from the survey, shows that, people, they always think their dogs are never going to do any wrong, a bit like people do with their children, don't they, these days? And I think it's a real problem, and the stress it causes, and of course the animal welfare issue of the sheep themselves. I think, most people with dogs would be very strong on animal welfare, yet they don't seem to realise the damage they are doing, especially to inland mews in particular. So you talked about Scottish legislation, so that leads us neatly on to our second speaker, who is Grace Reid, NSA Scottish Regional Coordinator. And so you are going to talk, Grace, about recent legislation changes in Scotland and the general situation over sheep worrying in Scotland. So over to you, Grace.
Thank you, Neil, and good morning, everybody. And thank you, Phil, for the survey results. It just shows you just how important this topic is, and all the data collected is increasingly important to making sure that changes can be made in a legislative manner. So many of you will be aware that there has been recent changes in Scotland, and on the 24th of March this year, MSPs voted for the Dogs Protection of Livestock Amendment Scotland Bill that Emma Harper brought in last year. So I think a good place to start would be the previous legislation that we've had in place. So there were various pieces of legislation which aimed to promote the responsible ownership of dogs, and therefore attempted to prevent livestock worrying and attack. However, they were outdated, and we weren't able to include an adequate range of measures to address the problem effectively. So we had the Dogs Protection of Livestock Act 1953, the Land Reform Scotland Act 2003, Control of Dogs Scotland Act 2010, and also the Dangerous Dogs Act 1991. So basically the main overarching act was the Dogs Protection of Livestock Act that made it if any dog worries livestock in any agricultural land, the owner dog, and if it is in the charge of a person other than its owner, then the person also shall be guilty of an offence under the Act. So previously there was a penalty up to £1,000, and the police were limited to only seizing a dog in order to ascertain who the owner was. So no offence would be committed if at any time of the worrying or attack the livestock were trespassing or the dog belonged to the owner of the land. So that was quite limited in that aspect. The Land Reform Scotland Act, that is basically your right of access, your responsible right of access. So it gives anyone a statutory access to most land and inland water in Scotland. And this also includes agricultural land, which will have fields which are horses, cattle, and other farm animals such as sheep. So breaching the code is not a criminal offence. However, this was an issue that continues to be seen on a daily basis. We by no means wish to restrict responsible access in the countryside by dogs, but we must be critical of the fact that the dogs have to be appropriately controlled at all times with a clear understanding of the ramifications of unintended consequences which may present themselves, i.e. sheep worrying by dogs. Another important act to mention is the Control of Dogs Act Scotland, and this allows local authorities to impose measures on the owner or a person in charge of a dog where they've failed to keep the dog under control through the issue of a DCN. A DCN will generally specify control measures that have to be followed, such as keeping the dog on a lead in a public place, or specified in the notice that the authorised officer considers to be appropriate. So this is a really important piece of legislation that allows a local authority to supervise the enforcement of conditions and the fact that a dog has to be kept under control. But for a DCN to be issued, there's two key elements that have to be adhered to. So the dog has to be the dog is not being kept under control effectively and consistently, and also the behaviour gives rise to alarm or apprehensiveness. So it can be imposed whether or not a dog attack has been taking place, but previously the Police Scotland have not been able to issue a DCN, which has now changed. The Dangerous Dogs Act 1991 also introduced strict controls on dogs, which were specifically bred for fighting, and also made an offence for anyone in charge of any type of dog to allow it to be dangerously out of control in any public place or in a private place. But it does not apply in circumstances where the dog may injure another animal or in instances of livestock or in their attack. The interpretation section of the Act defines dangerously out of control as any occasion in which there are grounds for reasonable apprehension that will injure any person or assistance dogs, whether or not it actually does so. But there's a wee bit of ambiguity around that. So this brought us on to why to the need for change. As I said, the range of legislation makes it a criminal offence, but there's a lot of ways to get out of it, and there is limitations. This has also led to the underreporting by farmers and crofters due to the out-of-date 60-year-old legislation, which has not been kept up with farming practices. We're always evolving all the time, but legislation just has not kept up with it. And also there's a lot of confusion around what sheep worrying is, what is an attack. So that's a wee graphic just to kind of show the various elements of what it means, and the public still don't really know either. And until you're in that situation yourself, it's quite hard to figure it out. So Emma Harper MSP, she's been working on this for at least 4 years. She introduced this new bill to Parliament last May. It passed stage 1 in January this year, passed stage 2 in February this year, where MSPs were putting through proposals for change. And on the 24th of March, it passed with unanimous cross-party support and should come into law later on this year. NSA Scotland were asked to contribute to the evidence sessions on the 23rd of September last year, and Jen Craig attended the Rural Economic and Connectivity meeting to do this. So our main points were to get across that legislation alone will not stop the occurrences of this. It's not the dog's fault, nor is it any other breed likely to attack than another. It's every dog's instinct to chase, even if they're usually obedient and familiar with other animals. We believe that the occurrence of sheep worrying is solely the responsibility of, it's the sole responsibility of dog ownership in regards of training, control and outdoor access taken. And also the fact that consistent education is key to prevention going forward. A recent social media campaign by Scottish Government carried out before the election needs to continue after the election to keep the public engaged. And we also recognise that the police ability to be able to effectively deal with sheep worrying by dogs incidents in the past has been limited, and we're hopeful that this new legislation will go some way to rectify things in the future and further protect our farmer and crofter livelihoods and the sheep that they boast in the future. So the overview of what the new legislation comes into, it increases the penalties for livestock worrying to a fine of £40,000 and 12 months imprisonment or both. It also extends the definition of livestock. Before, llamas, alpacas and buffaloes were not included, and it also clarifies its application to working dogs. It also gives additional powers to the police for the investigation and securing evidence of the offence, and also allows them to seize and detain a dog suspected of livestock attack on any agricultural land. It also includes, and this is the vital part, that police can gather evidence to arrange for the dog to be examined by a vet, and also for the vet to take samples from the dog. And this can be done with the owner being present or not. So come before the Act becomes law, there will be a set protocol for vet practices to be drawn up, and Police Scotland will pay for any investigative work requested. This also alters the way the offence is described and defined, and it gives a greater prominence to the most serious incidents, to include chase, attack and kill. So that's your attacking versus worrying argument. So this should be a bill that is representative of all of the varying degrees of what happens when we're out in public. From the survey, why is this so important? I mean, we've all seen the increased access to the countryside, the increasing worrying numbers, and also the critical need for responsible dog handling training, and the fact that it is a legal requirement to be kept under control. Much of Scotland's landscape is maintained by grazing sheep and the farming businesses who make us a hyper majority of the rural community population. It must also be recognised that these farmers and crofters strive not only to maintain the landscape, but also have an integral objective to produce one of Scotland's greatest globally recognised products, Scotch Lamb PGI. And that's representative across the whole UK. We've got British, we've got Welsh, we've got all of the best products that we can get out there. Sheep are valuable assets, but I don't need to tell you all that. And it's not just the injuries or fatal wounds that leave an effect. The compensation is welcomed, but as the survey showed, 10% of people actually think that it is worth it, and it is incredibly difficult to ensure that the correct person's pay due to the nature of the instance. I mean, if you've got an unaccompanied dog, it's very hard to find the owner. So this demonstrates the further requirement to follow up incidents with DNA investigation procedures, and hopefully that will change because of this new legislation. And I think that's it for me today. So I would like to thank you all for listening, and if you've got any questions, just please shout.
Right, well, Grace, thank you very much. We're going to have questions at the end, and I'm sure there'll be plenty for you, because I think it's interesting in Scotland that this legislation is coming forward, because it'll be, if we can sort of look at what we're doing in England, taking evidence of what's going on in Scotland will be really good. So it'll be good when the legislation comes in. Hopefully we can see the effectiveness of it then, or otherwise, and, you know, if it needs to be altered here in England, then we can do so. So it's very useful. So thank you very much for that. That was a very good presentation. So our third speaker this morning is Marissa Heath. Now, she is secretary to the all-party animal welfare group in Parliament. Now, I've worked with Marissa ever since sort of 2010 when I got to Parliament, and she has a great ability to write good reports for APGOR, but also she has connections into government. And don't forget, with sheep worrying, it's not just about DEFRA, it's also about Home Office and so on. And so I'm very interested to hear what Marissa has to say this morning. There was also a report done, I think probably by APGOR, probably 2 years ago now nearly, isn't it, because time goes on. So I will hand over to Marissa Heath now. So Marissa, please.
Thanks, Neil, and thanks, Phil, for inviting me along today. I don't have a presentation, so I'm afraid you're stuck with my face for this one, but this is an issue I've been working on for some time, as you said, Neil, and I'm really pleased to raise the profile of it again today. I'm just going to cover two areas of work. One is what we're doing on responsible dog ownership, because I also wear a hat for the canine and feline sector group, and two is on the legislative updates, what's happening in England, basically. So we, as in the all-party parliamentary group for animal welfare, started looking at livestock worrying in 2017, as you said, Neil, and we undertook an inquiry a bit similar to how you'd run a select committee inquiry, where we collected evidence, brought in stakeholders for all evidence, and immediately, I mean, at the beginning of it, I thought, is this really a big issue? And I was really surprised by the number of organisations who came forward and said, yes, it is a really significant problem. Local authority groups, police, veterinary groups, and of course farmers. So we know it's an issue that's been simmering away for a long time. It's grown. Phil set out the reasons why: urbanisation, increased dog ownership. And finally, I think people are just fed up of seeing the aftermath of these attacks. Phil said NSA have been working on this for 8 years. It's not a new problem. I think when we started the bit of work, everyone said to me, why is APGOR seeing this as a priority piece of work? And it's again going back to what Phil said about welfare. Everyone on this call is going to be familiar with the outcomes of livestock worrying. We've seen reports of aborted lambs, full-on attacks where animals have been killed. We've seen reports of livestock being driven off cliffs in coastal areas. not just limited to livestock as we know it. 2020, I spoke to the British Horse Society. There were 144 incidents involving horses, which involved quite a lot of accidents around people being hurt as well. You'll have to excuse the toddler in the background there. There's also been numerous reports from Basque and others around the keeping of game birds with out-of-control dogs on boundaries and enclosed pens, stressing the birds out, results in them breaking their necks, they're flying against the nets, etc. So this is a real element of very serious suffering, actually, caused by the fact that these attacks often also take place when there's no awareness from the dog owner or no reporting. And we know lots of farmers have found animals that have been left injured for hours and hours, sometimes even overnight. So it is a massive welfare problem. And it's easy to overlook this kind of issue, as it's probably not the most sexy social media campaign that captures the attention of the public, but it is, as I've said, very much a high-level welfare issue, and not limited to the animals that are attacked, but also to the dogs, because it's fundamentally an irresponsible dog ownership issue as well. As you know, and as Neil touched on, we published a report in 2018, a parliamentary report supported by cross-party members, and we made a number of recommendations which are moving forward. And I'm going to go over those in a moment because I think there's some very positive news. But first, I'm just going to stay on the point of the wider problems linked to irresponsible dog ownership for a moment, and why it takes both legislation and education to really tackle this problem. Dog ownership's a good thing. It should be encouraged, and there's a huge majority of dog owners who want to be responsible dog owners. However, there's a real need for a lot of people to understand dog behaviour better. Recent coverage in the press about dog attacks and dog bites increasing have shown a much wider problem to me. And I think there's a real element of naivety over the owning of a dog and its natural behaviour, which can be addressed to an extent through education and working with owners. I spoke to NFU Mutual to see what sort of work they were doing, and asked about insurance claims, because we did our own mini survey late last year. And they found that 64% of dog owners are letting their dogs roam freely in the countryside, even though half of those owners admit their dog doesn't come back when called, so they are aware of it. And PFMA, as Phil touched on, are reporting a significant increase in dog ownership, which has occurred during lockdown. NFU Mutual estimated the cost of dog attacks on farm animals across the UK has risen already by 10.2% coming into 2021. We know from police partners that livestock attacks are underreported, and not every farmer will make an insurance claim if their animal suffers. So all of the statistics we're looking at, I would say, are an underestimation of what's going on. That links to problems then with the Home Office, as you mentioned, Neil, and making it a responsibility of the police to actually report and note all of these incidents, and therefore giving farmers the confidence to actually report what's happening. So I think it remains that we need to take a broader approach to getting solutions which address these wider issues. Responsible dog ownership, to me, and it's something, Neil, you've worked on for a long time, it starts from the point at which a prospective owner chooses the breed of dog, which often might not be suitable for their lifestyle, as it happens at the moment. They're choosing dogs that need a lot of exercise, that maybe aren't as trainable as they could be. They might be keeping them in an environment that's not completely suitable. And it also goes to looking for the right breeder who's socialised the puppy and then told them and helped them go on to training and understanding how to handle their dog. And we can call these sorts of things the countryside code, it's been mentioned, dog etiquette. It's just about telling people how to use a lead, how to manage their dog, how to understand that using leads at points during a week doesn't mean your dog cannot run free, and doesn't mean they don't have full and proper exercise. So this is work that's being undertaken by groups like ABGOR, but more by the canine and feline sector group, who have members including the Kennel Club and Dogs Trust and the RSPCA. And I'm pleased to say that we started to have conversations with government about that and how they might support that work. Some of the people on this call may be aware that government did a campaign this year on puppy buying. So they've shown that they're open to doing these sort of public education campaigns. And we think there's something that really needs to be done about the responsible dog ownership, linked back to the fact that, yes, we're talking about livestock running today, but we've also seen this increase in bites in urban areas as well. Petra. So we know that we've got to do this piece of work, but I think it's really important to point out that during the ABGOR inquiry, we actually found that 75% of the attacks that are happening are escaped dogs and often repeat offenders. So that is why key changes to law are vital, as a large number of people who own dogs involved in these attacks actually, quite frankly, aren't really caring about the welfare issues and will not listen to messaging. These are the owners who don't know where their dog is and they're not keeping it safely contained at home or in the garden. And so only enforcement is going to deal with these individuals. So then I can come on to some positive news. Nothing's ever guaranteed until it's been announced, but we are hoping to see an announcement on livestock worrying for England in the Queen's speech next week, 11th of May. And from this, we're expecting to see legislation introduced that will be better able to tackle these problems. DEFRA have been really open and receptive to working with both the police and APGAR, and we've had a number of meetings that Phil's also been involved in to look at the powers we think need to be put in place in England. And obviously we've looked at the points that Grace raised in her presentation to what Scotland have done, because we think they're taking the right measures. So, for example, some of the points we've put forward are we need clearer use and updating of language within the Act. Why are we using the word worrying? These are attacks and chases. We need to understand exactly what we're talking about here, and it needs to sound as serious as it is. We've also spoken about widening the scope of definition to livestock. We've had examples of camelids being attacked, people keeping deer, donkeys, game birds, as I mentioned, free-range poultry. So we want it to be a wider definition. We want to allow for dogs and other evidence and offence to be seized by police. We're looking at where we give police better powers, allow them the actual clout to be able to say, we believe your dog has been involved in this attack. We're going to come in and take evidence and find the proof of that. And we want to extend the scope of the law to cover any land where livestock, as it will be defined, is permitted to be. And that would apply to both England and Wales. There's a number of other measures, you'll find them in the APGAR report that we outlined, but from our conversations with DEFRA, they are really listening, and I can't say what the legislation will look like. I'm not a civil servant, but we are very hopeful that it's going to be very positive and cover all of the points that were in the APGAR report. The Queen's speech, I'm looking forward to immensely next week. If this isn't on this, I'll be very surprised, and there'll be a lot more work to do, possibly a private member's bill, but I do feel quite confident about this. And it will be over to you, Neil, really, to guide this work through Parliament into legislation and to make sure if there are any gaps that they get filled. So I think that's all I've got to say, Neil. I'm happy to take questions on that. I'm kind of multitasking here, trying to give a 2-year-old water at the same time as speaking to you, but I hope I got the points across. Thank you.
Thank you, Marissa. You're always very good at multitasking at the best of times. So I have confidence in you dealing with Petra and delivering the speech this morning. I mean, you've given me my homework to do, which is always good of you, because I think it is right, because we can follow what, you know, if the government introduces legislation, then we can follow it and we can take evidence and we can try and tweak it to make it work better, really. So, and I appreciate all the work that you've done and APGAR has done, and of course you've worked also with Tim Morris, haven't you, Professor Tim Morris, who's a vet and a non-executive member of AHDB. He's very able, actually. So a good combination. So thank you for that. So I think there was certainly one question come up with from Peter Ginman, and that's I think Phil, you want to answer it first, and that's to do the figures for injuries include abortions. So can I hand that over to Phil, and can I ask members to start bringing in their questions? Otherwise, I shall start asking all the questions myself, which I'm more than capable of, but I want you all to join in, please. So over to you, Phil, and then if Grace and Marissa want to comment also, please do. So yeah, Phil, please.
Thanks, Neil. Peter, yes, they should do in theory, but what we know is that sometimes it takes a long time for the impact to be felt, particularly when we're talking about aborted lambs. So in theory, farmers should be included in lost lambs or aborted lambs. But, you know, as Marissa said, I think we know that there's a massive level of underreporting, both in the impact on individual cases and on a large number of farmers who are still not reporting at all. So I think we can safely assume that the figures that are being used are an underreporting of the reality of the situation.
Yes. Can I bring Marissa and then Grace in? Marissa, I think one of the issues over of sheep that are bought is that sometimes a dog will chase sheep around, may not actually bite them. So therefore, you know, there's not an awful lot of sign of injury on the sheep. And I think this is a real issue of how do we actually get through to people how serious it is to chase inland mews around, because like I said, you'll only find out later really the number of abortions. So whether Marissa and Grace would like to come, I'll bring Marissa in, then Grace, and then I'll move on. There's another question here. All right.
Everyone thinks their dog's completely incapable. Even a tiny dog, even a Jack Russell or something's capable of attacking or livestock worrying or biting someone for that matter. So there's a big bit of education that needs to be done here with all partners to ensure that we do better on this. But I mean, I don't know if DEFRA will take this forward. It might be something, Neil, you want to raise in Parliament, but our idea was that people should have a duty to report. There should be an effect for not reporting something, and even if you're just the witness, you should kind of say to the farmer or someone, I've seen a dog chasing those sheep, so that the time and date can be noted, and there be some kind of thread of recognition, so the poor farmer doesn't just find 2 weeks, 3 weeks later his animals are bored and he has no why. I think that's probably something government would be nervous about doing, and it might be something you could raise for us, Neil, about how we ensure there's some kind of logging of these things that happen.
That's right, because we don't want sort of big brother, but on the other hand, we do actually want this to be properly reported because of the seriousness of it. Yeah, I will give that some good.
It doesn't mean the person's automatically going to be penalised or something's going to happen to them, but it's like a car accident. You don't end up in prison or in court because you banged your car or hit someone, but you do have a duty to say, I've done that.
Yeah, own up to it.
Neil, can I just come in there before Grace comes in? Can I just come in and pick up on that? Because I think in our survey, I can't remember the actual figures now, but there was a very high proportion of respondents who said that they hadn't even witnessed the attack. So that issue about an attack taking place where there's no physical, injuries, that sheep are just chased around, no one sees anything, and then you get an abortion storm in 10 days' time or something. You don't quite know what you're related to, but there'll be plenty of those cases going on as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Marissa. Grace, please. What's your sort of situation in Scotland? Really, will the new legislation help a bit with this, or what?
Hopefully it will. I mean, it'll never be completely going to sort the thing out unless we get people to take responsibility and know the full aspects of things. And a lot of it is physical. You could see the extent of the attack. Farmers see the abortion side of things, but mismothering is quite a big thing as well. To the untrained eye, a lot of our stock men and women that we have operating these big sheep farms and even smaller crofts, they're a day in, day out. They know the difference between the sheep like their own children. The public don't actually, they just see a sheep, they don't actually know the difference. Well, that one's got certain attributes. So mismothering the lambs, it's a very, very physical effect of this, or an aspect of it, but it isn't always picked up. So it's not just the things you can see, it's the things you can't see. And as Phil already said, it's the long-term effects. So hopefully it will go to a long way to sorting this out, but until people just get control of their dog at all times, and even for wildlife scenarios, we are here for sheep mainly, but if you've got a dog off the lead, it will be hunting around wee nests and things for our birds. So for everything, for biodiversity, it's crucial.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all three of you have made the point that, people always think that they're going to be able to call their dogs back, don't they? And of course they don't, because even if they're not sort of really vicious dogs, that once they have the fun of it and chase, then, and of course, as far as many owners are concerned, the dog is just enjoying itself, and yet it's causing a huge amount of damage to the sheep. And I think this is a big issue for us to get over to the public. So I've had another question from Anne Bush. Dogs are predators. Sheep and other livestock are prey animals. This may need to be stressed in education. Even just the presence and sight of a dog is a threat to prey animals, as they have, I understand, an innate instinct to alert to dogs as a threat. So that's very much the psychological side of it, really. So shall I? I'll give Phil a rest for a moment. I'll bring Marissa in first, then Phil, then Grace. Okay. So Marissa, please.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of obvious to us, isn't it? I think that we know that's the truth. But as I've gone back to saying, most people don't. I mean, we have enough problem getting people to go and buy the right dog in the first place, let alone then training it and knowing how to look after it. I think that, well, I know that all the NGOs, all the dog welfare groups and things like this are up for the challenge, but I think we've got to take an innovative approach to how we get to people, because the kind of people listening to the messaging are probably not the ones that are necessarily causing the problem, the sort of ones that are tied, you know, signed up to charities and things like that. So we've got to be more innovative, and I've spoken about this numerous times. We have things like family support programs. You know, Neil, that I'm a counsellor in my other sort of life, and we have things like family support programs, and where we go into communities to educate families that may be struggling. And a lot of these families have dogs, and you go into the situation, you think, yikes, that's a bit of a risk, or that child's potentially at risk because the dog's sort of running around. These are the people we should actually be talking to. They're different people, and we should be using messaging at things like motorway service stations on the way to areas where people are actually going to take their dogs for a break, a walk, a specific walk, in the car parks, and just garages, petrol stations, things like that, and actually being a bit different in the way that we try and message. How we do that messaging, that's something to think about. We have found, research has found that kind of aggressive messaging, sort of showing ripped open throats and things, isn't very effective. But on the other hand, completely right, dogs are a risk, and they scare flight animals, prey animals. So we have to be a bit more upfront in our messaging and work it differently. I think that's something we all know, and I think the local authorities are up for doing that work, because actually it's quite a good engagement piece of some of those hard to reach people. Animals, dogs, they tend to bring kind of families and communities together, actually.
Right. Okay, thank you, Marissa. I'll bring in Phil and then Grace, and then I've got another question for you all. So over to Phil, please.
So if to come at this from a slightly different angle as well, there's a connection here with access, I think, and increasing access to the countryside is a good thing in one way. I mean, it's great for people to enjoy the countryside, but it does bring people into situations that they're just not used to. And I think he's absolutely right that from what Anna said, dogs are predators, and you hear and see on many occasions where suddenly that instinct just kicks in from a dog, and unless the dog is extremely well trained, there's nothing that anyone can do to stop a dog chasing when it starts to chase. So dogs are predators. I think sheep are prey animals, definitely, but it's quite interesting if you look at some of the practices down in southern Europe where they use guard dogs to roam with sheep to guard them from larger prey, lynx and wolves and the like, and the sheep obviously get very accustomed to those dogs, and we all probably know, those of us that keep sheep, that the sheep will get used to our dogs, but in a way that's where it relates to access, in that there's a lot more non-routine incidents that are happening at the moment where sheep are met with something that is completely unexpected. So I think you're right, Anne, that dogs are definitely predators, sheep are definitely prey, and there is that prey and predator behavior going on. But it's not to say that sheep don't get used to something that is a routine, as long as they get used to it and it's not a threat to them. And I think, if you just relate that to access and the fact that more people are visiting more places where they wouldn't have been before, they don't quite know what's around the corner. The sheep aren't used to seeing that person. Again, they'll get sheep, like other animals, will get used to individuals. So sheep will become accustomed to things, but it's the surprise element that I think is important here.
Okay, thank you, Phil. Grace, anything else to add on that one, Grace? Is this from a Scottish angle?
No, I think in a country as vast as Scotland and completely different landscapes you can get just from one county to another, it just shows you, just as Phil was saying, the surprise element, that you don't expect a sheep to be there, or you don't expect a dog to be there, especially with the access code the way it is up here. But straightforward, simple messaging will be key going forward, and the majority of the people aren't the problem. It's the few that is making a repeat habit of it, to not have the dog under control, as Marissa was explaining, and the fact that we all need to just take responsibility and be a collaborative approach, and consistent as well. There's no point trying to come at it from all different angles, although it is a very different angled problem. We all need to try and get it just straight and simple and driven to people.
Right, thank you very much. Right, so I've got a question now from Edward Stanton, and this is very much about, is there a chance to bring back dog licenses and also compulsory microchipping? Well, microchipping is compulsory. One of the problems is that many of these microchips are not up to date. If somebody sells the dog, moves the dog or whatever, especially where you've got the sort of semi-criminal element involved as well. So, like I said, I think I'm gonna bring in Grace first this time and what's happening in Scotland, and then I'll bring Phil and Marissa. So Grace, please.
Yeah, no, as you already said, the problem is trying to keep microchips up to date and also having a database that corresponds with the DCNs that can be handed out and the microchips and all of the local authorities talking to each other. So that would be key going forward to make sure that one offender in one local authority cannot just simply move to another local authority and just continue on being reckless. Another important point to mention would also be the fact that each pet should have an ID tag on their collar and when they're out in public or in a public place. So at least you have, if you manage to get a hold of the dog, if it's safe to do so, you can actually make sure you can get a hold of the owner's details. So both of them points are critical, but obviously it is a people problem again, just making sure everything's up to date.
Yeah. What about any move towards dog licenses in Scotland or what?
I haven't heard of anything, but I will come back to you on that if that's possible after the event.
That's fine. Thank you very much. I'll bring in Phil and then Marissa, please.
Thanks, Neil. I've thought about this quite a lot over recent weeks and months as well, and I often come back to the fact that I think that there is a case for bringing back dog licenses, if nothing more than to have a central register of knowing where dog owners are, because I think if you've got a central register, at least you've got some means to communicate with people. And if you think about where we are with chipping dogs, as you say, chipping dogs is a requirement, but they're not being kept up to date. It's a little bit like we've got with EID in sheep, isn't it? I guess, you know, we've got EID chips in sheep. We've got a central database, and in neither area are we really using that information very creatively or sensibly. So dogs are being chipped, and there is a database, but there's no central register, and there's no central way of communicating with dog owners. So. And you probably wouldn't get that unless you did something around the legislation to require the details held within chips to be held on a central register. So I think there's something that needs to be done in that area. I'm not quite sure what it is, but I do know that we've got, you know, a stupid situation where dogs are being chipped, and we're not. There doesn't seem to be any central register or any access to a register or any use of that register. Maybe a hybrid between the two is what's needed.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. And Marissa, before you come in, I mean, if I sort of change a car, move a car, have it on road, off road, whatever, I immediately have to go through to the DVLA. Otherwise, I get a letter saying what's happened to your car. Where is it? So why can't we have a similar system for dogs? I imagine it's resource, but over to you, really.
It's the problem that we've touched on of the myriad databases and there not being a central one. Now, you know, Neil, that they did the equine database, which is very effective, where government can hold all of the horses' identity in one place now. We need that for dogs, quite simply, because in a way it is a license. It can be like a license. If the information is updated, which is absolutely key, you've just touched on that, Neil, there's no point someone microchipping the dog as a puppy and then it never changing. There should be an absolutely strong need for it to be updated if you move, change name, etc., etc. If you did that, then you almost have a kind of license, but it needs to be accessible. So the police and the vets and things need to be able to go on one system really fast like that and find out who owns that dog, where they live, etc. As at the moment they have to search, and it takes a load of time and resource, and then when they find it, it may not even be up to date. So I don't necessarily think there's a need for licensing. I think a proper microchipping system can act as that. And the good news is that DEFRA are reviewing the microchipping legislation, because it's been 5 years now, Neil, is scarily enough, since it came in. So it's being reviewed this year, and we at the Canine and Feline Sector Group are really saying to them, you've got to make these changes. You've got to have one database. You've got to have a need to change. You've got to have some sort of penalty. There has to be a system that also forces people, that makes them a bit scared. I would be scared if I didn't change my car, that I was going to get £1,000 fine or something from DVLA. So we need fixed penalty notices or something that a local authority or whatever can check the microchip and say, you haven't updated it, you moved house 2 months ago, so here's a fine. And so people have a reason to do it. So if you can help us, Neil, with this review of microchipping as it goes through, we've got a chance to try and make it better.
Yeah, thank you for that, Marissa, because you see there's an issue not only with the situation behind identify the dog with sheep worrying, there's also an issue that, you know, a lot of these imported puppies that have come in by smugglers and things have got sort of largely fictitious microchips in them, and so, you know, there's a real issue here. So I mean, it's right that we've got this legislation, but, you know, there's no point, it's always the issue of, you know, you can create as many laws as you like, you've got to enforce those laws, really. And I think a lot of this to do with sheep worrying and dogs generally are very much about trying to not only improve the law but enforce what we've got as well. So I've got another one from Peter Ginman, which is about he farms on common land, and what he's saying is that, you know, if you get so much trouble with dog worrying, will you actually graze the common land into the future? And of course, with our new, ELMs, new environmental land management schemes that drive towards looking after nature more, even though I think farmers are still doing a pretty good job, but that's Neil Parrish speaking. But seriously, it's a case, will farmers in the end give up on some of the commons, and then they become undergrazed and very difficult for people to access? So I'll bring in Phil first, then Marissa, and then Grace. So over to you, Phil.
I think this is a serious issue. I mean, I hear cases where commons aren't grazed at all. People are just not prepared to put their livestock out because of fear of attacks. It's surprising. I even hear cases of sheep farmers who won't put their sheep in a field anywhere near a weekend or over a whole bank holiday weekend, because of the fear of an attack, because of the high level of usage of a certain footpath or whatever. But I guess on the common, on the commons issue, most of that land, I think, is probably all now covered within the Countryside and Rights of Way Act. So people aren't even constrained on footpaths on those areas. They can walk wherever they want to, and they do. And I think it does affect not just farmers' willingness to put their stock out, but the way that sheep will graze that land too. So we've got this very ancient system of hefting and of sheep belonging in hefts on our common land, and that does need a level of calmness, really, for the sheep to do what comes naturally to them. If they're being chased around all over the place, you can't expect them to maintain their existing grazing habits. So I think, the people that are suffering from dog attacks or dog worrying, generally it's affecting the maintenance of the habitat, I guess, the looking after the countryside. And for those areas where people just feel unable to graze at all, it's going to change that habitat entirely. And most of our common land is renowned for its landscape value and its wildlife value. So, I think it's a really serious issue. Neil, can I just come back on, it's a bit of a hybrid point, but I just want to come back on the previous point and give an example of a woman that contacted me a couple of weeks ago, someone who was a dog owner, never had a dog before, took the dog out for a walk, and it got caught up in a sheep worrying attack. It attacked sheep. She took it very responsibly, went and reported it to the farmer, and anyway, it went to the police, and it was all resolved in the end. But what she said to me was that at no time when I bought my dog did anyone tell me what effect it could have, what impact it could have, how dangerous it could be. The breeder didn't tell me, and when I took it to the vet for its vaccinations, the vet didn't tell me. There's no central point. There's no way that I would have known what my dog could have done. And that's where I think a central register or some form of licenses system could come in. And
Yeah.
you know, you could say, well, she should have looked, and
That's
she probably
right.
should have done. But you know, she was quite innocent, and she's quite right. At no point did anyone give her an idea at all about the impact that a dog could have had.
Yeah, we don't realise sometimes, do we, the naivety of people, really, and I think sometimes, you know, genuinely do need the education. You then got the sort of tougher elements of society that need the book chucked at them, but you know, there is a real difference, and it's getting the balance right and getting it these. So so Marissa, what's your take on this, really?
You know, I'm quite simplistic in my sort of thoughts that if you had this proper database, as soon as that lady bought her dog, she should have updated the microchip details on it, and there should be an automatic way of messaging her, sort of saying important information about your dog, please read, from the government. Did you know your dog can? And educate people. You know, it's such a simple system, and you would read it because it's the same as getting an email about your car or something. You love your dog, you'd be like, God, government are emailing me about my dog. I better read this. On the common land thing, I think that's where the police and local authorities have to step up, actually, because they need to be very, very visible about the fact that if your dog does something on common land, that's a really serious issue, actually, because I don't think that's very clear. So by police presence in these areas, that I'm not talking, I know police are overstretched and under-resourced. I'm not talking about them hanging out on common land all the time, sort of watching for dogs, but you know, I know I've got common land all around me, and if they appeared once every month or so just for an hour to talk to people who are parking their cars in these spots and things, and put up some scary police signs that says if your dog harasses any animal grazing on this land, it's a serious, and we'll have the new legislation hopefully, it's a serious thing and you'll get fined ... I think that would help scare people and give farmers a bit of reassurance that actually there is things being done. So I think that we can probably try and control that issue, because I agree with you all, it's important that you know, these animals are grazed on common land.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Grace. From a Scottish point of view, I mean, I think people don't realise that is, you know, not being sort of too pompous. It's a privilege for them to walk over land. It's a privilege for them, even on common land, to have that grazed and looked after, and they must respect what's there. And how do we, you know, is it any better in Scotland regarding this issue, or is there a lot of need for greater education and perhaps fines on those that will not be necessarily understand they are being educated? I will put it no stronger than that this morning. I'm being diplomatic. So over to you, Grace.
I think in any severe case that a fine and the most severe penalty will be applied, but going on from what Phil and Marissa have already said, I mean, traditionally sheep farming is part of the culture. It's been built up over many generations. The rural populations and communities would not be the same if we didn't have our shepherds out there, and also the sheep population in the more further far-flung areas. So people really need to realise the value of the sheep, not just for the meat production side of things, but also soil structure, shaping the landscape, and also all of those things that come with being a rural community. I think the police do have an aspect to play. I know there quite a lot of the forces up here are understaffed, but this problem is not going away, and it needs to have, someone needs to step up and have the authority for it. And hopefully this bill, by giving Police Scotland more powers, will be the standout people to deal with this. I mean, the local authorities and the SSPCA will assist, but Police Scotland will be taking the lead going forward, which I think is the way it should be done.
Okay, thank you, Grace, very much. Right, I've got another question from, two questions from Tim Tyne. It is often stated that farmers have a right to shoot a dog that's attacking sheep, but that is not true. There is no legal right. A farmer could be prosecuted for damage for somebody's property, i.e. a dog. The farmers do have a defence, that's all. Let's face it, if you shoot someone's £3,000 pedigree dog because it killed a £50 crossbred lamb, then you may be considered to have used excessive force. It is high time farmers had an absolute legal right to shoot a dog that's worrying stock. There are also exemptions to the defence with ambiguous wording which needs sorting out. Happy to discuss this as I have had some experience of the matter. And then he also adds another another question, which is very concerned that so few farmers reported mental health issues related to stress of sheep worrying. My fear is that this is related to firearms ownership, gun owners are afraid that admitting to have mental health issues will result in their license being revoked. So there's a really couple of really good questions there. I'm going to bring in Phil Stocker first. Phil, you've got the pay grade. You answer the question first, please. All right.
Yeah, it's again, it's a really tough one. I still think that very few farmers want to shoot dogs. It's always a last resort. But Tim's right that it's a strong line of defence for farmers that if they shoot a dog, they still have to give evidence that they were doing so responsibly. The dog was being caught in the act of attacking sheep, and it's a defence. I know of cases where dogs have been shot just post the attack, so i.e. not in the act of attacking sheep, and those farmers have been prosecuted for that. So again, my understanding is that Tim is right, it's a defence, and it's got to be to stop the dog attacking the sheep. It can't be because the dog has attacked the sheep. It has to be to actually prevent and stop an attack occurring at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Marissa, you've had sort of talked a lot to the police and others. What's your take? It's a very difficult one, this one, because the issue is that if you've got a dog chasing your sheep that's caused a lot of damage, your first reaction, you've got a licensed gun, you shoot it. But I think sometimes it can cause a load of grief. So what's your take on it, really?
It's a last resort for a farmer, isn't it? Because they don't want the owner, and probably other people backing the owner, saying that poor dog, because people always take that perspective. I'm interested in what Tim says about the language, and I think it's probably worth a conversation about that as we sort of move through with trying to tidy up the legislation. It wasn't an issue that was raised massively when we did our inquiry, to be honest. I think, as we said, most of these attacks seem to happen, the dog's left. I don't know if that's right, Phil, but the returns we got is that the farmer goes later and finds all of these kind of carcasses or injured animals everywhere, and that was a real problem. But I'm interested to look at it and take some thoughts over to DEFRA if the person who asked the question, I think it was Tim.
Yeah, I think that would be very useful, because I think it's an issue that needs to be dealt with very carefully. I understand the farmer's position. I would feel the same, but sometimes, like I said, it causes a lot of grief, especially if the evidence perhaps is not 100% there. That's the trouble. And sometimes perhaps, our first reaction is to shoot first and ask questions later, but we can't really in this instant, however annoying and loss making and angry you may be. So Grace, what's the situation in Scotland?
As you said, a lot of people do not actually see this attack happening, and it is a matter of cleaning up the mess afterwards. So the very few Scottish respondents that actually did have it see it occurring, many of them probably would try and run to the gun, but it is a very last resort. But I don't think people know enough that you can actually phone 999 in an emergency when a sheep attack is taking place. It's not simply a 101 or phone the police afterwards. It is a 999 situation. I'm sure that'll be covered in the rural crime workshop that's taking place next week with the police and the Kennel Club. So yeah, the police really need to step up on this side of things and offer more support for farmers and crofters across the UK.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. So, look, if I was sort of chairing the select committee now, I would say, now have you witnesses any last things to say? So, because I think it's been a great session this morning. Phil, any last comments to make before I sort of wind up, really, because we are getting towards finishing time. All right. Okay.
Just to keep it really brief, I think that this is a twin track issue. Really, we have to keep working on education and trying to encourage greater responsibility amongst dog owners, but we also need in England a strengthening of the legislation too. It's got to be a twin track approach. So that's what I'd like to end with, really.
Okay, thank you very much for good comments. Marissa, please, and then Grace.
Only really briefly to say that we've got a good team. I think the right people have come together. As Phil said, we've got to keep the pressure on, because I think there's still a lot to be done. Even if the legislation gets changed, I go back to the education and that whole piece about getting government to work with us in responsible dog ownership generally, which I know is an issue you're very keen on, Neil. So I hope we can all get together.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And Grace, for your view in Scotland.
Yeah, we're slightly forward for the first time, I would say, in the fact that we've got the legislation, so that's good. It's a good start. We need to keep on moving on with education, but we also need to realise the value that the public do bring to the countryside. A lot of our places in Scotland wouldn't be able to exist without the tourism and things like that, so we just need to work together in harmony, make sure that sheep are protected, all other livestock as well, and also make sure that everybody has a responsibility to access the countryside in the way that everybody can, and it's beneficial for all. So it's our workplace, but it's also other people's place, so we need to match them two together and make sure it works for everyone.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, can I thank you all, and again, can I thank the National Sheep Association for organising this morning. I think it's been very, very good for members to hear, what's going on regarding sheep worrying. I think it's very good for me to hear, exactly what's going on, because we will use it. The evidence we've talked about this morning, and the issues will be, as legislation comes through Parliament, I will work with APGAR and yourselves and anybody to try and make this legislation better, to get better education, to get better enforcement, and to actually really try and get through to the public the seriousness of, and as Marissa said, it is sheep attacks. It's not sheep worrying. Sheep worrying almost sort of downgrades the issue, and I think it certainly doesn't need downgrading. It needs upgrading. I also think, as we move into an era where the governments of all countries, including Scotland, will want greater and greater access to the public, to land. They must act responsibly. We do need to farm that land. We do need to graze it, not only from a food production point of view, but also from an environmental point of view. And so those are the issues. So I think we need to sort of play back in a way to government. Well, you want us to do and behave in certain ways. Well, we need to be able to farm that land, stock that land, and we need protection from dogs, basically worrying our sheep and other livestock. So I think it's been really good. I've enjoyed chairing it this morning, and so if I was in Parliament, I would go order, and we would finish. But thank you all very much, and I appreciate being asked to chair it. And I will definitely, Phil and the NSA, if you will give me notes, please, from today's meeting, and then that will be useful. And Grace, thank you for the Scottish perspective, and Marissa, we will get together in Parliament when we're allowed, that is, and sort out where we're going with this legislation. And Petra's growing nicely, so that's good. So good morning, Petra. So with that, I should say bye-bye. So bye-bye, everybody.
Before people leave, thank you very much, Neil. But before people leave, could I just point out that, or remind people that this is part of a 2-week campaign that the NSA is running. There's a range of activities that are taking place. We're doing a lot on the media. And I think on Friday lunchtime this week, we've got a workshop taking place on mediation. The following Monday, next Monday at lunchtime, we've got another workshop taking place on rural crime teams and the like, and that was the one that Grace was referring to. And then next Wednesday is 7:30 in the evening. There's one on communicating with the public, really, the use of signs and those sorts of things. So anyone that's interested, or if you know anyone's interested, do take a look at the website and register. It'd be good to see you involved in those workshops. So thank you. And thank you, Neil, for chairing proceedings today, and everyone, Marissa and Grace, for taking part.
Okay. Phil, can you also add my best wishes to your campaign and my full support, okay? Because I think it's really good, and it's good that we are all working together, because we are getting somewhere, but we need to get somewhere, because, there's a huge issue over sheep attacks, I think. And I think we've got to start talking about sheep attacks probably, and not sheep worrying as well. So thank you very much, everybody. And I will let you go off, and you probably had your breakfast by now. Have lunch now. Bye-bye then. Bye.